we're glad you guys are here. Welcome today. Now, we're going to jump in. So if y'all notice, kind of every other week, we just switch the order up. And so sometimes we get our thought of the week first. Sometimes it's second. Tonight, you get me first. Now, I want to give you a heads up tonight. Tonight's topic, we're going to close out our series on the vow. So we've been really looking at the vow, trying to take our time, understanding the marriage vow, trying to really make sure that we can appreciate that promise that we made and to remind ourselves of that promise that we made and what that entails and even a little extra. And so we're going to wrap that up tonight. And what you're going to see tonight is our topic is going to be a little bit more about you as an individual. And then when we move into our couples activity right after this, you're going to take this same similar topic and move it into your marriage. So I want you to kind of track along with me and have some patience. But I think what we're going to look at tonight is going to be very helpful. Now, when Sarah and I got married, she told, or even before we got married, she told me something that I'd never heard anyone say before that actually I thought was kind of weird. She said that almost her entire life, she had wanted to marry a pastor. That's kind of odd. I don't know. Maybe you don't. And I told her that when she said that. I thought that was kind of odd. But for her, almost her entire life, since she'd been really following the Lord, she just felt like God had kind of placed a call in her life to marry a pastor. So here's the good news. She married a pastor. Good for me, right? It made it one less thing I had to work. One less thing I had to try to do was to impress her in that category because that was something that she was looking for. Now, here's what's awesome about that. The fact that God was preparing her, and by the way, I say that's odd not to be mean, but really that is an odd thing. It's not very normal that you wake up, I'm going to marry an engineer. This is going to be awesome. And you begin preparing your life accordingly. But because God, in a unique way, had been helping her to appreciate what that meant and also to begin to understand the magnitude of what that meant and the things that would come with that. God was preparing her for that moment. So for me, when I married her, I married someone that was ready and excited to help me fulfill the call God had placed on my life. So what about Sarah? Well, when Sarah and I got married, she was working with Chick-fil-A, and she wanted to pursue this opportunity that required her to do some traveling. And at that season of her life, to fulfill that call, she was going to be traveling in and out once a month, 7 days to 10 days a week, once a month, or 7 days out of the month. And I had to not necessarily make a sacrifice in my call, but I had to make an adjustment to my schedule and how I was approaching things so that I could do what she was doing, which was to help me fulfill my call. I had to make sure that I stepped up to help her fulfill her call. So for those of you that have kids, what I would do is work all day, then come home, and I would be a single parent for 7 days a month. And the truth is, it was actually a great joy as I got to spend close time with my kids. But the truth is, God was preparing me leading up into that. God was preparing us for that as we had a long-distance relationship while we were dating. And so all throughout our life, God was using these different things to, one, prepare us for each other, but two, also to equip us so that we could help each other fulfill the call that God has placed on our life. And so where we find ourselves in the vow, the very end of the vow here is these words, and to do everything I can to help you fulfill God's plan for your life. As a spouse, you and I are not only responsible for us, but we get to be part of helping our spouse fulfill God's call in their life as well. That's a beautiful thing. It's a little bit of a challenge at times, but it's a beautiful thing. So what I want to do tonight is I want to look a little bit on purpose and calling. And I want to work on us as individuals, and then we'll transition into marriage. So here's the first thing I want to show you. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 says this verse. It's Paul writing to actually singles. Listen to this. You may have heard it before. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure an undivided devotion to the Lord. What Paul was saying to the single people is, hey, listen, before you get married, you need to use your singleness to secure an undistracted devotion to the Lord. Well, that's genius, right? If you learned that when you were single. A little tricky if you're just learning that maybe for the first time right now tonight and you've been married for 2 to 22 years or longer. It can be tricky. I want to show you something. Look up here. This is the marriage triangle. Have any of you ever seen this before? Okay, so what happens in most people's life, not all but most, is they go, all right, this is great. I'm going to find a beautiful, gorgeous, smoking hot, of course, godly woman, and I'm going to pursue her. And once I find her, then I'm going to make sure I get all that stuff right with God. I'm going to start going to church. But right now, while I'm enjoying my life and doing whatever it is you do. And so we have this perspective where we're chasing after the spouse and God's kind of off to the side. And the reality is that's really wrong. It's wrong. It causes things to be flipped upside down. It causes us to see people differently. In fact, I always tell people this, if Sarah had met me just maybe 4 years before she did, I don't think she would have looked twice at me. Because my life was so jacked up. That's what God can do in an individual's life. And so we have this and we see this and it's a problem. The real picture should look like this. That when we were single, man, we were pursuing God. God, what do you want to do with my life? What do you call me to do? Where do you want me to go? And as we're doing that, hopefully there's a beautiful woman or a beautiful guy or a handsome man or whatever. And you're both together chasing after the Lord. And then as you chase after the Lord, you look left and you look right and you go, whoa, you're going where I'm going. You're cute. And you serve the Lord, and you do this, and and all of a sudden you see this drawing closer together as you're drawing closer to the Lord. And you go, well, that's great for those people. Well, here's the good news. No matter where we are in the room, it's never too late for us to first discover who God is in our life, and then in doing that to discover what he wants to do with us in our life. And so that's what I'll look at. I'm going to give you a couple things to think about, a couple things to consider. This may be helpful for you. This may be helpful for a friend, a kid. This is two of what I found to be some of the most exciting things to navigate. And they're also clues to your calling. Listen to the first one. Your calling is not your decision, it's your discovery. Your calling is not your decision, it's your discovery. Now, this is fascinating, right? Because we grow up, and maybe even, careful here, we even raise our kids and say, babe, you can do anything that you want to do, right? And of course, that's not wrong per se, right? We want to encourage our kids. We want to give them great vision. But the reality is, if your kid goes and does whatever they want to do in this moment right now, what are they going to do? They might play video games for the rest of their life. They might eat Twinkies for the rest of their life. Or they might do both. I don't know. Right? And so when we look at that, we could say, okay, of course, the heartbeat of wanting to be encouragers of our kids is great. But the reality is we want to be careful there because we don't want them to just do whatever they want. And the same is true for you and I, even as adults. It's not about what you want to do or what I want to do. It's about what God has created you and I to do. Now, why is this important in marriage? Because if you and I are trying to figure out what God wants to do with us in our life, you are going to be frustrated until you figure it out. And that frustration is going to bleed into your marriage. That frustration is going to bleed into the way you see your spouse, the way you see your kids, the way you see your job, and everything in between. And so it's so important that we begin to grasp this. The truth is, the true fulfillment that we will find is only found in Christ. When we discover who Christ is in our life, that's when we begin to discover what he has created us to do. So our decision, or our calling is not our decision, it is our discovery. In fact, believe it or not, I didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to be a pastor. In fact, I never wanted to be a pastor. Don't let that out of the room. It's just the truth. I never wanted to be a pastor. In fact, I wanted to play sports. I wanted to do film. I wanted to do nothing for a short season of my life. I mean, I had all these other dreams and aspirations of what I was going to do and who I was going to become. But the reality is, as I began to pursue the Lord, and I'm blessed to say it happened in this church, and it can happen for you too, by the way. That was a side note. That was free of charge. But as I began to pursue the Lord and figure out who he was in my life, do you know what I discovered? I discovered a calling that I never knew was there, but that God was equipping me for from day one. Unbelievable. And so what we have to understand first is if we don't know who God is, we are going to struggle figuring out who we are. And if we don't figure out who we are and what we were wired to do, there is going to be a dissension that will continue to grow as you go further and further in your life. Do we get this? So what do? Well, we got to note the things that trigger us. Note the things that excite us. Note the things that we're passionate about. Here's the second thing. Your passion is a clue to your calling. Your passion is a clue to your calling. So watch this unfold. Do you remember the story, maybe you do, of David and Goliath? Heard the familiar tale, David and Goliath. Well, do you remember when David was going to visit his brothers who were standing in battle, fearful, of course, of Goliath? When he went to visit, he looked across the way and he saw this Goliath man standing there, taunting his God, making fun of his God and his people. And you know what David did? He got mad. He got angry. Who is this Philistine that would dare defy our God, my God? He was angry. There's a good anger. Did you know that? He was angry. Now, why do I say that? Because here's what's interesting. In the Greek language, the word that is used for passion is also from the same root word that comes anger. The root word that leads us to passion is the same Greek root word that leads us to anger. What does that mean? It means that our passions and our anger are linked together. The things that we are passionate about and the things that we are frustrated about are actually linked together. The root word is the word thumos. Everybody say that together. Thumos. You are smarter. This is awesome. That root word is used in the same two ways. So what does that mean? Well, get this picture. Think about the man that was frustrated about having to stand up all the time. What did he do? He created the chair because he was done with that. I'm not sitting anymore. We think about the people that are frustrated with disease, frustrated with sickness. What do? They become doctors. They pursue cancer to try to find cures. Think about the mom that found her daughter killed, honestly splattered on the cement, she would say, because of a drunk driver. It was that anger and that passion that drove her to create Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And so what we see is a really beautiful picture that even in the scriptures, and for us, you and I today, for you and I to try to figure out who we are, why God brought us to this earth, a clue to that calling is the thing that you're passionate about and the things that anger you, the things that frustrate you. They could be a clue to your calling. So, we consider these things and we have to ask ourselves, what are those? What are my passions? What are the things that anger me or frustrate me? What are the problems around me that I may be called to solve? Because here's what's beautiful. God's going to place some of those same things within you as a couple. You and your marriage. Some of you may have grown up and you said, I never want my kids to experience the household that I experienced when I was growing up. It angered you. And that anger can be used as a passion to drive you to have a new mission and a new vision for your family, maybe even starting today. How you saw your father treat your mom, or your mom treat your father, or your parents treat your brother and sister. Those may be passions the Lord's given you that not you as an individual only, but as a couple, you might be able to do something about. And so we want to first discover who God's wired us to be, but we also want to figure out what does God want to do with you and I as a couple, as married people. Two are better than one. The strength is stronger, and what God can do through both of you is unbelievable, but it takes us together. So here's a few thoughts for those of us helping each other, helping our spouse fulfill their call in life. Here's the first one. Your career may not always be your calling. Your career may not always be your calling. I remember hearing a story that I thought was so fascinating. There was a gentleman, he was meeting with some people, and they were going around the table saying, what do you do? What do you do? And so it came to him, and he said, well, to make money, I sell carpentry supplies. But that's not what I do. He said, my job is every Tuesday night, I meet with a group of 6th grade boys, and I'm helping them navigate some of life's most difficult challenges. Man, that's it. Now, some will be called to a vocation that will link up with their calling, and I think it'll probably never be fully separate. But the reality is there are going to be some of you that are businessmen, businesswomen, and you're going to be out there and you're going to be doing great things, but at the same time, you're going to be fulfilling a call, maybe somewhere else, doing something else. That's important to note. That takes some pressure off of some of us. Now, I would say this. If you're miserable in your job, it could be a clue that you may be in the wrong place. In fact, just for fun, the U.S. labor force says that 75% of people are in the wrong career. Interesting. Now, don't go quit your job tomorrow. I didn't tell you to do that, but I'm just saying, discover your calling and you might begin to get some answers. The other thing I want to say to this is your spouse and your kids are your calling too. Can I get an amen from everyone? Your spouse and your kids are your calling too. That's important. Because here's what some people do. Even pastors, I'll pick on our own people. I don't know if that's how you say our own people, whatever. We go, oh, well, I love my wife. I love my kids and my family, but